I'd like to start the meeting so that we can be on time. A couple announcements. Number one, you can't hear. Okay. Let's turn the sound up until we can hear. Okay. Try again. Can we hear yet? They say, okay, but they're still saying no. Try again, please. Is that better? Yeah. One says yes, one says no.
This is turned up to maximum.
Okay, it's turned up to the maximum height. Okay. All right, this is as good as we're going to do, so I guess we hold the mic as close as possible and go from there. A couple of announcements. Number one, during the comment period, we'll be limited to 3 minutes, and we would like to hold the comments pertaining to the subject matter. And we have two subjects tonight. One would be the economic analysis presented by the U of M people, and then also the whole tech decommissioning process. So we want to hold the comments to those two specific items. And lastly, we will adjourn promptly at 8 p.m. because our meeting is scheduled from 6 to 8, and we will acknowledge that. So at this time, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second, it's been moved and supported. All in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, none. And the second item would be to approve the minutes from our previous meeting. I would entertain that motion. It's been moved and support. Moved and supported. All in favor of approving the minutes of the previous meeting, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, none. They have been approved. And we've talked about the public comments. So this time I will turn the meeting over to Sarah with questions and answers from our previous meeting.
Thank you. One thing I will note before we get into this presentation or the addressing of the questions, members of the PCAP, we received an email. Julie, would you click into the presentation, please? Just move through the next couple slides. There have been slight changes made to the Palisades Community Advisory Panel charter. The updated version is available online on the county's website. The changes were minimal, primarily wording things related to who is responsible for recording, maintaining original copies of the. Yes, is this better? Or is this much better? All right, this is where we'll sit. Minor changes have been made to the Palisades Community Advisory Panel charter. This change was approved yesterday afternoon by the Board of Commissioners. Only minor changes, primarily related to who is responsible for maintaining things like records of resignations or original meeting minutes. The most significant change that would be relevant to this group here is there have been allowed the ability to add members to the PCAP. There's two methods for that. One, the Board of Commissioners may recognize that there's a gap in what's recognized, and they can proactively seek folks to fill those seats. We can also have members of the community. If you're interested in being part of the PCAP, you can apply for that through the county administration. If you're interested in that, please connect with me and I can get a hold of an application for you. Ultimately, whoever is on the PCAP is determined by the Board of Commissioners. Any questions about that at this point from PCAP members? Okay, not seeing any, we will just move quickly into addressing just a couple of comments and questions we received at previous meetings. We'll begin. There was a question that was asked at our last PCAP meeting regarding employment opportunities for people who are being impacted by the closure of Palisades Entergy employees. There was a question what was being done. Mark O'Reilly, who's the Business Solutions Director at Michigan Works, wasn't able to be here this evening, but he provided an overview of what Michigan Works is doing for those employees. The full written statement is available on our website, but essentially they're working with Entergy to organize a career fair. They're working with employees of Entergy to develop their resumes and look at transitioning into new roles and positions. So That's what's being done on the Michigan work side of things to support Entergy employees. There was a question also about the specified region that had been selected for the economic impact study. John Engelhoff, who is a member of our board, provided an overview. John, I don't know if you'd be inclined to say anything other than this, or if this statement just suffices. But the initiative was funded to study the 3-county area served by the Southwest Michigan Planning Commission. And that's why we've chosen to focus the study in that area. There was also a question about the impact of the closure on local utilities, what it'll mean for energy prices. At this point, we don't have any information to share in that space, but I do want to share that the economic impact, EGI, the Economic Growth Institute, is looking into that, and when they have data that is finalized, they will share that. Lastly, there were a variety of questions that were directed to the NRC's Public Affairs Department. Okay, I'm sorry, we're not taking public comment yet.
Reviews are very awesome if you have time to.
So the NRC did take comments that were solicited from the public directly funneled to the Public Affairs Department. They didn't have those finalized responses in time for this meeting, but I've been told they will be provided shortly, and they are in their final draft review and approval phase. As soon as we receive those responses, we'll disseminate those to members of the PCAP and also the folks who are on our mailing list. For those of you who are in the audience who would like to be on the mailing list, you can get on that by sending an email requesting to be added to palisades@marketvanburen.org. And truly, finally, we've received many questions about the site, future development, environmental concerns. We have passed all of those on to the folks at Entergy. When Entergy was presenting, we shared those all with Holtec, and we shared those all with the NRC. So I won't be directly responding to these questions, which have been provided in their full forms to Holtec. They've been in those questions, and we will be working to address those questions in this meeting. And with that, I'm going to transition over to the folks from EGI, the Economic Growth Institute. We have Carmen Wells-Wade. Did I get that right? She'll be presenting here today. Julia will also be bringing in Lucia, who will be presenting to the group virtually. Carmen, if there's anything you need, by all means, otherwise the floor is yours.
Thank you. So if I come up to the lecture?
Absolutely, yes,
Okay.
please.
Let's see that on as well. Okay, because I'll just introduce her pretty quickly. Thank you so much. Okay, good evening, everyone.
I'll bring her up.
That's no problem. You can advance to the first slide, please.
I think your clicker should be up there, the clicker for you.
Oh, apologies. Okay, today we're going to be going through our draft analysis findings for the economic impacts of the Palisades nuclear plant decommissioning. Just slightly. And as was mentioned, I'm being joined by my colleague, Dr. Lucia Ferris. She is joining us virtually today. It says in your packet, Dr. Sarah Train, but we are doing Dr. Lucia Ferris today.
We're working on getting her on the screen. My apologies.
No worries. While you do that, I'm just going to take a few minutes to talk about our methodology. We've addressed this a couple of times in previous PCAP meetings, but I'm going to go ahead and outline our approach for our analysis. The project partners are utilizing two different economic modeling softwares, both IMPLAN and MSAFE, for our analysis to understand the impacts of challenges to the local economy. The modeling technique is called input-output analysis, which is a type of applied economic analysis that tracks the interdependence among various producing and consuming industries of the economy. It measures the relationship between a given set of demands for final goods and services and the inputs required to satisfy those demands. In this case, it will measure how the closure of the plant ripples throughout the economy. So we've mentioned to you before, we were going to be looking at the direct, the indirect, and the induced. So note, the impacts will be modeled within Van Buren County and the Tri-County region of Van Buren, Cass, and Marion counties. And just please note also that MC was utilized to validate all of the overall trends and top industries impacted with the job losses. So we work directly and in close collaboration with Connexus Group and Market Van Buren for this data analysis.
I believe if Lucia begins to speak, she should show up on the screen. We should at least be able to hear her. We're working on getting her on the
That's
screen.
okay. Lucia, can you hear us? And can you say if you can hear us?
Hello, everyone. I can definitely hear you. Can you hear me?
We certainly can. So that triggered us to be able to see you. So that was helpful, Lucia. Thank you.
Great.
So now at this time, I'm going to hand things over to Lucia for our next portion of the presentation.
Okay, so I just want to make sure we're on the third slide. I cannot see the slides and also the room at the same time. So just making sure that we're looking at the same presentation.
So Lucia, yes, I covered slide 2 already, and the team here is uploading slide 3 right now, but you will start from slide 3. And it looks
Okay, perfect. Yes, I can see it now.
great.
Okay, so if we move to slide 3, basically the results of the model that we're presenting today reflect the data that we obtained from Energy, which was then used to estimate the number of employees transitioning and therefore lost total compensation. The data we received includes 594 employees at the Palisades plant, with employee wages approximating 70 million. 260 of those employees are transitioning to Holtec this summer, while transitioning out 334 jobs. Based on those numbers, EGI estimated total compensation to include all benefits and payroll taxes as an additional 30%, given the Bureau of Labor Statistics data for the region. Total compensation would therefore approximate about $91 million for the 594 employees, which is about, on average, $153,199 per employee. If we just look at the 334 jobs that are transitioned out, then we're looking at about 51 million in lost compensation in 2022. Next slide, please. So an input-output model such as InPlan will look at 3 defining effects given industry production in a particular economy. This production supports demand for production in other sectors, and this is both due to supply chain spending and spending by workers. The direct effect is the initial change in the final demand of the industry output, employment, and labor income dollars. In other words, these are the initial direct effects from transitioning those jobs out in terms of lost income and output from those jobs directly. The indirect effects are business-to-business purchases in the supply chain taking place in the region that stem from industry input purchases. And these have to do with how the producer spends their dollars with the suppliers. And finally, the induced effects, they stem from income being spent in the region, typically from the wages of the employees working in the direct and indirect industries. So you'll see all 3 of these effects in the results that we're about to show you. Next slide, please. So to better understand the results that follow, we want to quickly discuss some of the terminology. So when we refer to output or total output, we can think of this as GDP or the value of the total production from the industry in the region. So it is made up of value added, but it also includes intermediate inputs. So value added, we consider to be a more impactful way to look at what is happening in the region, because value added looks at the contributions to GDP from this production specifically, taking away those intermediate inputs. Value added can also be thought of as labor income, including both employee compensation and proprietor income if there is any, plus any other property income, so something like corporate profits or subsidies, and taxes on production and imports. Next slide, please. So we broke out the results of our model, as Carmen mentioned, into the economic impacts in Van Buren County, as well as separately within the Tri-County area. So first we'll present Van Buren in 2022, and then we'll transition over and present the results for the Tri-County area. Here you can see the direct, indirect, induced, and total impacts for 2022 in Van Buren County from a reduction in employment of 334 jobs, with a direct loss of labor income of approximately that 51.2 million. And you can also see total output of about 166 million under that direct figure coming from those job losses. If we look at just the industry's contribution to GDP without those intermediate inputs, and the reason we want to do this as well is to avoid double counting those intermediate inputs in GDP, then it's about an $89 million reduction. If we look at the total impact numbers at the bottom of this table, and we look at indirect and induced effects, we're also looking at job losses of about 549, with a reduction in the value added of the industry of approximately 103 million, and a reduction in total output of about 193 million. Next slide, please.
Christine, we lost that last part of your sentence. I think you said approximately, but could you repeat that, please?
So for the bottom of the table, the total impacts, so we're including there the indirect and the induced, as opposed to just the direct impacts from those 334 jobs. If you look at everything, we're looking at an employment impact of 549 fewer jobs, and we're looking at a reduction in GDP for the region of 193 million. But if we look at just the value added, so the contribution of the industry to the GDP, then you're looking about 103 million.
Thank you. We heard you that time.
Okay, great. Next slide, please. So in terms of breaking down the indirect and induced effects from that previous slide and looking at the top industries affected, here in the table, you can see an overall loss of about 161 jobs across the most affected sectors. So if you're looking at that total column, the third column with the data beginning with employment services of a loss of 34.7 jobs, if you sum up that column for about 75% of the ripple effects being accounted for in the economy, for those 161 jobs total, it represents the largest chunk of the effects in the economy. So the other 25% will be spread out across a variety of other sectors with much smaller impacts. So these are the industries that are most affected. You can see that in terms of the industries with the greatest impacts, employment services leads the list. So I'm looking at total jobs again, the loss of 34.7, and followed by the restaurant industry, retail, healthcare, and so on. When you look at the percent change, so when you look at the number of jobs in that industry, taking into account the percent change with the new number after those jobs were lost, we're looking at about 7% for employment services. The next largest would be about 5% for other local government enterprises. And employment services is anything tied to employment placement agencies or contract staffing services. And then other local government enterprises have anything to do with revenue generating for local governments. So things like ports or parking or airports. Next slide, please. So in this table, you now see the direct, indirect, induced, and total impacts for 2022 in the Tri-County region from the direct loss of those 334 jobs. So if we look at the total impacts, again, at the bottom of the table, we see an overall total loss of employment including those indirect and induced effects of 739 jobs, with a reduction in labor income of approximately 73 million and a reduction in total production of about 259 million. If we look at just the industry's contribution to GDP, so in other words, the value added, then the impact is a reduction of about 131 million. Next slide, please. So again here, in terms of breaking down the indirect and induced effects from the previous slide, to the top industries affected in the Tri-County region, here in this table, you can see an overall loss of about 298 jobs across the most affected sectors. Again, looking at that total column and adding up all the ripple effects for about 73% of the economy. And the remaining percentages is spread out across much smaller impacts across a variety of sectors. The largest job losses, again, you can see are employment services, restaurants, retail, healthcare, and so on. And I wanted to point out as well that when you see electric power transmission and generation, that we are not speaking about direct effects here. So we're not speaking about the 334 jobs directly lost through the closure of the plant, but instead these are indirect and induced effects. So it has to do with supply chain spending and the spending of labor income in this region. So again, it gives you a broader picture of what's going on sector by sector. And if you compare Van Buren to the Tri-County area, you can also see that these changes in terms of the percent change in particular are much smaller given the larger geographical region. So this concludes the economic impact portion of the presentation. And now I'll turn it back over to Carmen.
Thank you, Lucia. We really appreciate it. Lucia will stay on for questions as well. I'm really just going to outline our next steps. We're going to continue to receive community feedback. We're going to continue to engage with industry and receive information that they're able to share with us. We're working on 4 other key areas in addition to these industry impacts that Lucia has outlined today. We're looking at impacts to the housing industry. We're looking at tax impacts. We're looking at environmental impacts as it relates to the economic modeling portion only. And we're also looking at information regarding the cost of purchasing electricity. So all those other areas are going to be included in our assessment, which is the next phase. So we're going to be drawing assessment from the information that was presented today, in addition to all 4 of those other areas. And the final analysis findings report will be released in this summer as we move forward with the rest of our data collection that we're receiving. On the screen, you'll see a place to request information or post comments or questions outside of this meeting. All those questions come to us and we were able to be replied to you in the forum through the PCAP. But for now, I think I will turn things back over to Sarah.
Thank you, Carmen. The next phase of this, we're going to follow the same format we have previously. If members of the PCAP have questions or conversations they'd like to have, Carmen and Lucia are available for that. And once we've concluded that portion, we will open the floor for public comment. So do we have any questions, comments from members of the PCAP here that they're inclined to share or ask of the members of AGI? Mr. Doro, I'm going to run a microphone over to you to do our best to make things audible for the folks in the back.
Well, you can just repeat the question. Basically, the number of like restaurants and retail that are looking for workers, and we're saying if we're going to be reducing that much, I mean, is there a type of like it's almost going to be a wash, or because they're all looking for workers that are having a harder time?
Mm-hmm. Lucia, were you able to hear that question? I can give a response, but I wanted to see if you wanted to respond to the question, or do we need to repeat it?
No, I did hear the question. So the first thing to kind of point out here is that So the latest effects, I would say, within the past year in terms of the labor force participation rate and the unemployment rate aren't necessarily reflective of these numbers. So particularly with the COVID years being very different in terms of data and analysis from previous years, what we attempted to do to mitigate some of that here is when you look at our results, we took 2019 data and 2020 data, which is the latest data available for the regions, and we averaged them out. So we could have a little bit of the effect of what's going on with COVID, but also to consider what would happen under normal circumstances. So they cannot incorporate yet what could be a temporary phenomenon in terms of the volatility in the labor market.
Anybody else have any questions? Mr. Hanson, I'm going to bring this over to you. This microphone, so that everybody knows, is for the benefit of the people in the room. We have these triangles that can pick up whispers, but the people in the back can't hear.
Can I presume that schools weren't included in the top industries impacted, but that would be in a future presentation? You're looking at the impact on schools?
We are including schools as it relates to our impact, our tax impact analysis,
So the
which
future.
will be coming.
Yep, okay.
Correct.
Does anybody else have a question here? Members of the PCAP. Mr. Rose raised his hand first. And we'll have him hand it right to you.
Okay, you're talking about the recovery. Can you tell me, do you have a timeline for recovery strategy to help with the assessment of the money being lost?
So our role in the recovery initiative is to first get through this analysis phase of the data that we're able to collect, and we're nearing the end of that. We're about to be entering into our assessment phase, which will be through the summer, and then that'll carry us into and will inform the recovery strategy. And then that'll go into year 2, and then there will be a year 3 for this initiative as well. So that's what I can speak to right now. When that assessment will be released, it will be released public comment and reaction, but I can't tell you exactly the month in which it's going to be released right now.
This is probably more of a comment than I want to follow up on Commissioner Doro's statement. Van Buren County from pre-pandemic to today is down 1,400 workers. So the labor market has shrunk that much. I'm not sure that's a temporary situation. That could be a longer-term demographic situation where the region itself is aging, getting older, getting a little bit smaller according to the census. So you layer on top of that the closure of Palisades. Now you've got all sorts of jobs open, plus the fact we've got very high demand right now. So there are, in Berrien Cass Van Buren County, there are 2,500 jobs open today. And we do not have the people. So this is really becoming more of an issue of a people issue than maybe just a straight economic development issue. So I just wanted to follow up on Commissioner Doro's statement. Thanks.
Two things that are sort of on the informational side. I'm John Eaglehoff, the Director of Southwest Michigan Planning Commission, and we're intimately familiar and collaborating with EGI as they go through this work. One thing I want to mention is that the analysis phase will be up for any kind of input that the public wants to apply to it through a survey that's going to be released very soon. So there'll be a press release out in the media. There'll be links to the analysis. And then there'll also be a survey that folks can take that can help us understand kind of where they're coming from. So that's one piece. And that's the way each phase of this is going to go, where there'll be opportunities for the public in general, and certainly the PCAP, to comment very specifically on each phase of the work. The other piece is that as we go through this work and we get more towards the end of the strategy itself, it's really going to focus on certain sectors that represent an opportunity to recover from this. So this information and the way that it breaks down across sectors is going to feed over into the assessment and then into the recovery strategy. So we can see those sectors that are profoundly impacted or at least, impacted in some way. And then the strategy to recover from that can look at those sectors and understand how in the economy we can mitigate that impact. So that's how we'll sort of continue to proceed through the study and ultimately look at what Van Buren and the region is really good at economically and try to catalyze those pieces of the economy to sort of compensate for what we're seeing here.
Thank you. George Stever, Utility Workers Union of America Vice President. I was asked the Economic Growth Institute, you're going to address tax loss, but what about student loss? Because I can tell you the people that are not staying, they are going to other states, they're younger, they want a career, and they mostly have children who attend our schools. And currently, obviously, the state disperses funds based on how many kids you have, and how many students you have in that school. So I don't know if that's on your agenda to cover or to look into, but I would suggest it be so.
We are working directly with Connexus Group and Market Van Buren and their their workforce development department, and those factors are going to be included within our assessment.
And does anybody else from the PCAP have a question or comment they'd like to make? Not seeing any members of the PCAP at this time, we will transition to a public comment period. As we transition to that, just a couple of notes to consider. The public comment period is open to folks online and in the room. In order to do our best to make sure that we have equal representation from both parties, we'll alternate from hearing a comment online and then a comment in the room. We'll go back and forth that way. We'll invite folks to form a queue here. We'll take public comments standing here. You'll have the microphone. You'll be allotted 3 minutes. You may only make one public comment per public comment period, as Chair Burr mentioned earlier. So at this time, Julia, I would ask you to take over the screen. We'll put up our timer for 3 minutes, and folks who are interested in asking a question or making a comment to EGI here are welcome to step forward, start to form a line, and we can have folks online do the same. Folks online will ask you to raise your hand. If you would just introduce yourself here, and we'll have folks stand kind of here. Hopefully easy for everybody to see.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Zachary Thayer. I'm Gerald Rockford's grandson. In the view of this application in Uber v. Waco, there was a design proposal on Michigan v. the EPA and Hilo v. the U.S. and view of Sonoma Power v. the U.S. for myself for a corporation called the HydroCore. The HydroCore takes an octagon, 8 wind turbines, 1,000 solar panels, using 2 Van de Graaff reactors with ocean technology, Thomas Wave Tech, C-State technology, and Eaton Chlor flow serve. At application, it produces 1.38 million megajoules to 1.83 million megajoules. This has the ability for every 10 gallons of salt water with 1.58 kilowatts to boil and make 1 gallon of renewable water for drinking. In Sonoma Power v. the U.S., Trifle v. the U.S., 3 Mile Island v. the U.S. This design is currently in the 4th, 9th, 7th, and 10th Circuit Court of Appeals and via the present day and its 100-day confirmation. At application, the Upjohn Foundation, 269-637, or excuse me, 375-0355, is the chairman.
iPad. It's working.
No, it's not. Okay, we're having some audio issues with people online. I believe Michael should be able to hear you through your computer. Oh, now it's switched again. All right, it appears to have resolved itself. I'll be coming around the room and just messing with these microphones to make sure everything is plugged in. Michael, I believe we can hear you coming through now. Can you just introduce yourself real quick and we'll confirm that we can hear you? All right, Michael, I think we're having some issues. Sounds like we can hear you, but we're not hearing your voice come through. We're going to mute you and see if we, oh, can we try that again? You're coming through. We can just muffled sound. It sounds like maybe a bad microphone on your end. We're gonna mute you and give you an opportunity to try to speak again and see if that fixes it. Go ahead and ask them to unmute, please. Yep.
Yeah, it's lagging.
All right, well, while we work on this, it's now showing lead as being muted themselves. We've asked them to unmute. We're going to give it a go for another person online and see if we can come back to Michael or Michelle. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Mr. Camps, we see your hand raised. You should have permission to speak at this time. If you would go ahead and introduce yourself, we'll make sure the audio is working on this end. Mr. Camps, oh, yes, we can.
Okay. Yes, this is Kevin. Use my phone if I could.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Word about the radioactive stigma effect, which I raised at the last meeting.
Mr. Camps, you cut in and out.
Radioactive stigma effect is the data.
Mr. Camps is asking about, I believe so. Mr. Camps, you cut in and out of there a little bit. It sounded like an internet connectivity issue, but I believe you're asking about the radioactive stigma effect, which you've raised in the past, and its potential impact on the local economy. Is that correct?
He muted himself.
All
so I
right,
don't know.
he's muted himself, so I'm going to take that as a affirmative.
Yeah, so we don't have the economic impacts of that as part of our study that we're conducting right now as part of our analysis.
Thank you, Carmen. We'll switch to folks back here in the room. Does anybody in the room, member of the? Yeah.
Mary, so you have something that, is this better?
Yep, just
Okay.
you're gonna have to almost swallow it.
So for the discussion of the jobs and the loss of those working now, is there going to be any comparison for similarity of the job qualifications or requirements for the open jobs and the qualifications of those exiting and how similar they are? So how, how aligned are they that they're qualified enough or not overqualified and similar pay to make that a fair comparison of apples to apples? And will your slides be available? They're basically, I couldn't read anything from the background.
Yes, our slides will be available. We had to make some modifications in the last couple of days, so they will be posted to the website. I will hand them over to the team today. And as soon as they can get them up, they'll be up there. And it sounds like what you're talking about for the workforce is a kind of an analysis or an audit of the job requirements today, if I heard you correctly, versus.
So we've heard about all the openings that need to be filled of the people exiting. How many are qualified for those jobs or more importantly, overqualified, so they would not stay here. So we'll still have our open jobs.
So we're not conducting a workforce development analysis right now for the current workforce. We're looking at the economic impacts of the closure. Your comment is on record, and we will take that back to the Perry study partners to talk about for a response to your question.
But with all due respect, I see that as an economic impact, because if we can retain them here, the impact on the economy would be less.
Thank you.
Thank you. Julia, have we had anybody new raise their hand online?
Yes, two
Okay.
more people, it looks like.
All right.
Kayleen is the first lady.
Kayleen?
Yep, Kayleen.
Oh, Kayleen, we'll start by unmuting Kayleen. Kayleen, we can hear your audio clicking through, so you should be able to speak to us now.
Hi there, can you hear me?
So you can.
Great. One of the early slides from this recent EGI presentation, data for modeling, maybe you could put that up. I was looking at, it looks like it's $153,000 per employee. Is that the wages that Entergy pays? Is that the average wage per employee?
So I can address that, Carmen. So there's two different designations. When we talk about wages, those are exclusive of benefits and payroll taxes. So wages are different than total compensation. So what we put into the model is total compensation, because we want the full impact to the economy, to the local economy. So what we received from Entergy in terms of the data was the 70 million for the 594 employees. But based on Bureau of Labor Statistics data for the region, we can estimate total compensation to include those benefits and payroll taxes at 30% higher than that. So the $153,000 number, it is an average wage per worker. And that is coming from our estimation of taking essentially that 70 million for the 594 workers, increasing it by 30%, and then looking at just the 334 jobs that would be lost.
So you're assuming that Holtec is going to be paying $153,000 per employee with the benefits and payroll taxes?
So essentially what we're saying is, based on data that we received from Entergy, when we look at total compensation, including benefits and payroll taxes, yes, on average, those employees were getting paid $153,000. If we were looking at just wages, then no, it is much lower. It's right around 117,000. And remember, it's just an average, right?
And 117,000 per employee would be what annual, because this seems a pretty good wage. I don't think decommissioner workers are going to be paid that, 153,000.
Well, just remember that, again, it's an average, right? So we're not looking at a median. So we're not looking at the most common wage. We're looking at all wages that include those outliers that are really high and really low. So
well,
on average,
it'd be nice
this is
to
what
have
they're getting paid.
it would be nice to have an actual report at some point. But anyway, thank you.
And I'll just add one thing to comment. We're not assuming anything from Holtec. We have not talked to Holtec.
That might be a good thing to do. Okay.
Most definitely agree. Thank you. I'm assuming you're standing here because you'd like to make a comment. So I'll hand it.
One quick question, and I appreciate what you guys are doing. I appreciate it. Obviously, Palisades close down, it's a big impact to the community. I grew up here. I lived in South Haven. I lived in Covert. I was born and raised here. Oh, I got my brothers and sisters that grew up in this community. If you run somebody South Haven, they know the service. But that being said, I heard your number on the people that work at Palisades. But I'm curious, does that come to the outage time when you have contractors come in and construction workers that come in? Because normally most outages, you got 500 to 600 guys that come in. Impact the community, they rent places, they eat food, they buy groceries. I don't know if you took that into consideration. I just wanted to ask that question.
So we've heard the question regarding contract employees for the times during outages, and we will take any data into consideration that we were able to receive. At this point, we're not able to receive exact information on those contractors, but we are still in our analysis phase. So we are open to receiving that information and including it in our overall analysis.
And Julia, it's my understanding we have someone online. I believe it's Mr. Keegan. So if you would go ahead and unmute him, and he should be able to speak to the group. Is Mr. Keegan unmuted? Okay.
Yes.
You should be able to speak to the group now.
Are you hearing me now?
Yes, we are.
Okay, okay, thank you. I'm trying to get my head wrapped around this. Thank you for quantifying the loss of 259 million. But I'm not quite grasping where you're going with that loss. And so if you could address that, and then I've got a follow-up comment.
Sorry if I pressed something. Where are we going with the $259 million loss? Well, we're in the analysis phase and we're collecting all the data that we can from not only the databases that Lucia has outlined, but as well as directly from our industry partners, as well as from the local municipal partners as well. And what we're going to be doing with this information while we analyze it, we're going to be conducting an assessment, which will inform the recovery strategy. So we're not in that phase yet, so please stay tuned. As we approach that phase, we'll be detailing our methodology as well as our outcomes in that phase. But right now, we're only doing the modeling of the direct, indirect, and induced impacts to help inform the recovery strategy. So we're a couple steps away from that just yet.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, the whole quantification, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, the whole quantification, economic loss, economic recovery is predicated on doing a proper cleanup and quality assurance and oversight. An example was done, a hypothetical was done looking at the Peach Bottom plant. What would happen if there was a spent fuel pool fire? And Professor Frank von Hippel and Dr. Ed Lyman with the Union of Concerned Scientists found that there would be a $2 trillion in property damage if there were a spent fuel fire. So your loss could be astronomical if you don't focus on proper oversight and cleanup and quality assurance at what's being about to take place. So you're counting your chickens before they hatch because if you neglect the oversight, the quality assurance required, the vigilance, the due diligence, you're going to end up with a tremendous potential for loss. So a cautionary tale, please focus on oversight, quality assurance. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't hear another question, so thank you.
Thank you for that. Is there anyone else in this room who would like to make a comment for EGI? If we don't have anyone in the room here and we don't have anyone online, we'll move on to full text presentation. Do you see anything online, Julia?
I do not.
Okay, not seeing any hands raised. We will thank you, Carmen and Lucia, for your time today. Lucia, Julia will demote you, so you will no longer be screen sharing, and we will turn things over to our representatives from Holtec.
Slide? Yeah, I'm just trying to find her. Needs to just do this right now. The presentation. Okay. The clicker should work now for you. Love it when that actually happens.
Technology is great when it works. Are we good to go, Sam?
Pardon?
Are we good to go?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, first, we like to thank the members of the community for inviting us here. My name is Joe Delmar. I'm the Senior Director of Government Affairs and Communications for Holtec. I've spent about 15 years in the nuclear industry. Prior to joining Holtec, I worked for PSEG in Southern New Jersey at their Salem and Hope Creek plants. Also like to say I have nuclear in my blood. My father was a pipe fitter, built a lot of the nuclear power plants in the Philadelphia region.
My name is Pat O'Brien. I'm the Senior Manager of Communications and Government Affairs for Holtec. I've been with Holtec about 3 years, but I've been in the industry 8. I was a former Entergy employee at the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station and transitioned over to Holtec, so I can appreciate what many of the employees are going to be going through with the transition, living it firsthand. And then before that, I spent about 13 years in state and local government back in Massachusetts.
We're going to tag team here, so we're going to try not to trip over each other.
Try it one more time.
There we go. All right. Just a little about Holtec itself. The company was established 35 years ago by Dr. Chris Singh. It's a privately held company. Majority of our business is within the nuclear industry, specifically in spent fuel management. And as the company has grown, we've gone into different areas of the nuclear industry, including decommissioning. The financial strength of the company, we have no long-term history of debt. Also, we're financially strong. We do a lot of self-financing on our own research and development, including in dry cask, as well as we're looking at small modular reactor. We have delivered over $4 billion in products around the world. And in addition, a lot of the contracts that we have are with utility companies like Entergy, Exelon, others that are for the rest of the life of the nuclear power plant. So we actually have another billable of over $5 billion in products that we'll be delivering in the future. So we do have a good future track record for what we need to be doing. Okay. So our core business activities, the company was founded based on looking at safe and secure used fuel storage. Originally, the company, Dr. Singh devised some strategies and some equipment to use in the spent fuel pools that increased capacity. The idea with spent fuels was that it was temporary storage, and the federal government would come take that fuel after about 5 years. Everyone's heard of the Up amount. Unfortunately, that does not open. So the spent fuel pool started to get filled. The company devised this technology to expand the capacity of the spent fuel pools and then moved into dry cask storage and providing that service. We also do heat transfer equipment for power plants, not just nuclear, but also fossil plants. We're in decommissioning as one of the reasons we're here tonight. We're also in the process of looking at a consolidated interim storage facility. Mentioned Yucca Mountain, there's also opportunities out there to do private consolidated storage. And what we're looking to do out in southeastern New Mexico, there was an organization called the At.the Energy Alliance. It's a consortium of the local counties and local governments. They had a piece of property out there in southeastern New Mexico, and they invited ourselves and other companies to bid on an RFP to do a consolidated storage facility out there. So we were selected, and we're nearing the end of the licensing process with the NRC. They've requested some additional information, but we do hope to have an NRC licensing decision by the fall. the NRC has determined from an environmental standpoint that the facility would have no environmental impacts on the local community. And one of the other things we're currently working on as well is a small modular reactor. We're in the process of designing that. It's been a lengthy process as we're working with the NRC. Also, we've received some Department of Energy funding to further with the development of that and proceeding with that project as well. So this is just an example of our worldwide experience in the nuclear industry, specifically in dry cask storage. There's 14 different countries up there, so we've loaded approximately over 1,700 dry cask systems around the world. This includes 74 plants in the US as well as 64 international. The one thing we like to point out is in addition to the US nuclear regulatory licensing regulations that we need to follow here in the United States, we also need to meet the regulatory requirements of all those other countries to be able to do business there. So we have strong oversight from a regulatory perspective, not just in the US, but around the world.
So I'll speak specifically to decommissioning since I'm working at an actively decommissioning plant. The organization is set up very simply. Holtec International is the parent company, and Holtec Decommissioning International is a wholly owned subsidy, and they'll be performing the decommissioning work at Oyster Creek, Pilgrim, Indian Point, and then obviously Palisades. And there's really a lot of logic behind what we're doing, similar to how At.the has operated Palisades as part of a working fleet. We've taken that model to decommissioning. We have established, implemented, and advanced, industry decommissioning with our work. The effort really is to improve safety, cost, and efficiency. We have a lot of lessons learned and techniques and new inventions across the decommissioning fleet that we use. So it is that fleet-based approach. We are using qualified and experienced personnel, as was mentioned before in the prior presentation. We do take on the former At.the employees to keep them on site. Really, the logic behind that is they have all the expertise and knowledge of the plant from when it was operating. That's really a benefit to us in decommissioning. We streamline policies and procedures and processes to operate as a fleet. And then really kind of the key part of our decommissioning model is accelerating that movement of spent fuel into the dry cask storage technology that we have. That really helps us allow these sites to be redeveloped and reused to the community decades sooner than if, At.the or Exelon, whoever may continue to own that plant. So I'll just talk through a couple of the projects that we're working on right now. Oyster Creek's down in New Jersey. We took that over in July of 2019, and our prompt decommissioning project began there. So we managed to demolish 24 structures and have a few more structures coming down this year. We got the all fuel out of the pool by May of last year. It was 4 months ahead of schedule, but now the key is 2.5 years from when we shut that plant down. And it had reduced the security footprint of that plant to just the protected area around the fuel. And then in parallel to that, we do work reactor segmentation. And the reason behind that, we go in and take out the reactor vessel internals at the same time so we can get rid of the greater than Class C waste. At the end of the day, what you have with these plants once they're decommissioned is you have spent fuel storage installation that has the remaining fuel and any greater than Class C waste, because at this time you cannot ship greater than Class C waste. And that will go theoretically when the Department of Energy moves fuel for the plants. Pilgrim is up in Massachusetts. That's a plant that I sit at. We took that plant over in August of 2019 and began demolition of a number of structures. Down in the right-hand corner, the largest structure on site was a warehouse and operations building that we just took down back in March. We did the spent fuel campaign there as well. That completed in December 2021, 30 months after shutdown. And really, when I talk about our fleet model, some of the things we really work on is trying to be innovative. And anyone can read the slides, but that last one down the bottom I want to highlight. We cut what are called control rod guide tubes. They're inside the reactor, highly irradiated. Normally, you would do that by putting people under the reactor and pulling out this equipment. We were able to develop some technology that actually allowed us to cut those from above 75 feet underwater, and it reduced massive amounts of potential dose to our employees. and accomplish the work quicker than what we've done before. So really looking to challenge and innovate as we do this decommissioning process. Indian Point's the most recent plant. We acquired that in May of last year. And we've done an initial 4 spent fuel canisters there. We are preparing to do the spent fuel process there, with those wrapping up in 22 and 23. We're working on reactor segmentation as well, and characterizing the internal parts of the vessel. And we've begun some initial demolition there. So you see up in the top right, we've had to enlarge the equipment hatch to be able to begin that decommissioning process at that site. And then for Palisades, so just kind of a brief history, we did do that joint application with Entergy in December of 2020 for the licensed transmission. And that was approved by the NRC in December of 2021. We anticipate roughly a month after they cease operations, we'll be on to take over the facility. That's going to include Big Rock up in Charlevoix. And we anticipate decommissioning the plant within 19 years. And then I'll speak to that a little bit on the next slide. So the decommissioning approach at Palisades, you know, I think what a lot of people don't realize when it comes to decommissioning is your timeline's the same. It's when you start that timeline, you know, is what we're looking at here. You have up to 80 years under a 60 years under a safe storm model. You know, if Entergy had stayed and decided to do that, but your decommissioning process part of that still is the last eight years or so. We have decided to move that up to the front part, so we'll do the decon method, and we will we'll be spending the first 3 years moving fuel to dry cask storage by 2025. In parallel to some ancillary, you're going to reduce risk at the site by removing oils and flammables from some of your systems. Get some ancillary buildings that you don't potentially need as a decommissioning facility as opposed to an operational facility. And you'll do what's called site characterization. That's really a big key part of decommissioning at these sites, where you have a known history of any spills or issues. You go and you validate that data. We'll do water samples, soil samples, a lot of testing to ensure that you know what the site has for issues and you'll know what to remediate. So that's a big part of it. The difference with the Palisades site, due to the trust fund balance, is that we will take a 10-year pause from 2025 to 2035, and then begin that kind of last 6 years of decommissioning in 2035. We'll still have the plant decommissioned on that timeline by 2041, as opposed to if we had gone to a safe storm model, you would have had that in 2082.
So one of the keys as we get near the end of decommissioning is making sure that the site is properly cleaned up. So in terms of cleanup standards, a number of items are going to be looked at. The areas of focus, as you can see there, land use, water, threatened endangered species, and other areas. We are going to be required to follow all federal NRC regulations as well as any state regulations to be able to properly meet their clean standards to release the site for redevelopment. We do have history of doing that. The photos that you see there, that is from our Camden, New Jersey facility. It was an abandoned shipyard along the Delaware River right across from Philadelphia at the Walt Whitman Bridge. And the site sat vacant for about 25, 30 years. So we went in, redeveloped the site, cleaned it up, a lot of environmental issues. We have a state-of-the-art manufacturing facility. That's that third picture there, as well as that last picture is the office building. In addition, we have a manufacturing facility out in Pittsburgh. It was a former Westinghouse manufacturing facility. We redeveloped that site as well. We had to do environmental cleanup before we turn that into an operating manufacturing facility again. So we do have a track record of doing that. So there's our contact information, but we did want to address some questions that were asked at the previous meetings that Sarah had passed on, and I know there was a slide up there earlier. Did want to touch on some of the topics. One is regarding the decommissioning trust fund. The trust fund, the total cost that we anticipate for decommissioning is $644 million. And as of the end of the year, Entergy's last projection on the decommissioning trust fund was $576 million. So that is one of the reasons that we are doing the 10-year pause to be financially conservative and responsible. We want to make sure that the trust fund grows to the proper funding levels that we need to be able to continue decommissioning safely and efficiently. So as we do that, the NRC allows us to do a conservative 2% growth rate with the decommissioning trust fund. So it's a very conservative amount that would allow us to proceed on that. The other, going back to the issue with environmental cleanup, there was a question regarding tritium spill on the site several years ago. How deep into the ground will Holtec go to clean up the tritium pollution? And this goes to all the pollution that would be on site. How deep we're going to go is yet to be determined. But as part of decommissioning, Pat mentioned, we're going to do a site assessment and characterization of the property to evaluate any environmental impacts. We do have a lot of historical data that from the operating history of the plant, but we need to go out and validate it as well. So based off the results on that, we will be taking proper remedial actions to clean up any environmental issues that go along with that. So, Pat, you want to talk about some of the other questions?
Yeah, I think there was a question of which business subsidy of Holtec's liable if there's ever an issue. That is HDI is the licensed operator of the plant. And then, do we have any plans for the site? This is something we get very frequently at all of our other sites. Really, our first focus is on safely decommissioning. What we say is we're willing to work with the community on potential reuse down the line, but we have no plans for what that site might be. You know, Joe and I have said a number of times, you know, we'll get multiple phone calls from developers, and really, you know, you have to understand there's not much you can do with the site until you release the NRC license, which is getting through that decommissioning process. So it's very premature in a lot of this, but it's definitely conversations we want to have with the community. You know, what you would want to see down the line, and we can work towards that. There was a question on cool down period, which I believe was touched upon for the spent fuel and why it was so long. Traditionally, up until some recent technological advances, the fuel would have to stay in the pool for up to 5 years before it could be moved to dry gas storage. That's changed with some of the Metamic technology that Holtec's developed. And now you can move spent fuel in the first 2.5, 3 years. So really, it's actually a pretty accelerated pace as opposed to you know, prior spent fuel campaigns. Do you want to touch on that? So another question was regarding the security perimeter. Will that change around the plant through the decommissioning process? So as Pat touched on at the Oyster Creek and Pilgrim plants, now that the fuel is all in the spent fuel storage area, what we call the ISFC, the Independent Spent Fuel Storage Installation, the security footprint will shrink to that area once we do that at Palisades. And that's all done within the NRC regulations and guidelines. They will review our security plan and modifications that we'll be making at that point, and they would have to approve any changes that we make to that when we get to that point as well. Another question was regarding the staffing levels, how they will change throughout the decommissioning process. So approximately 260 existing Entergy employees will become part of Holtec at the time of the transaction. The headcount will fluctuate throughout the remainder of the decommissioning process, depending on the work that's going to be done. What the headcounts will look like as we continue to proceed is yet to be determined. But as we move through those stages, and if there are any impacts on employment, you know, we will definitely be sharing that with the local community. One of the other things we've done, just like Entergy has done with the current workforce, is we do a lot of job fairs. We work with a lot of the other local utility companies to you know, try and identify local suitable employment for employees as well. The last question, which I know has been a question that's been asked multiple times, is regarding the transportation of nuclear waste off the Palisades site, specifically the use of barges on Lake Michigan. So historically, low-level waste and other waste has been shipped off the Palisades by a truck, and that will not change moving forward. The transportation of spent fuel, as well as the greater than Class C waste, parts of the reactor vessel that'll be sitting there with the spent fuel, that is something that the Department of Energy will make that determination. Once we begin decommissioning after a couple months, the Department of Energy will come in. They'll invite different members from the state and from the local community to take part in some meetings, and they will do an evaluation of transportation routes, either by a truck, by a rail, by a barge. That will be determined on that. I will say that there is not an existing functional barge slip at Palisades. So in terms of that being an option, you know, I can't speak to that in the future, but that's something that would need to be built, which I don't think that would be something that would be looked at in the future. So, but those are the list of questions that from the previous meeting, and we're hoping to take any questions now.
Thank you. We will start as we historically do. Mr. Arlander. He's already on top of it. He's raised his hand, so he goes first, but PCAT members first.
Orlando Washington with the Labor Union. My question for you guys is, my understanding is Holtec originally planned to have CDI carry out the decommissioning work. My question is, why isn't they included on this decommissioning this time around?
So CDI had been a joint venture between Holtec and S&C Lavalin. That joint venture was dissolved back in December. And those CDI employees were transitioned over to HDI. Really, it was a business matter between the two parties. So HDI has become solely responsible for doing the work. So it's just a different way, but that is how every site is now. It's all HDI. I was a former CDI employee between Entergy, Holtec, so I understand your question, but yeah, that's the model we're going with now with the expertise that we've developed for decommissioning.
Why was that decision made?
The two parties, so S&C Lavalin and Holtec, the two companies that own CDI, decided to dissolve that joint venture.
Fair enough.
Tom McCullough with Palisades Park, your neighbors. For the site characterization assessment, is that something you do internally, or do you hire out a consultant like ACOM or Jacobs and contract that out?
It's a mix of both, but we've used BHI at the other sites. That's a well-known company that does that type of work for radiological and non-radiological. Haley and Aldrich as well, we've used on the Pilgrim site. I believe we're using them on I as well. So we do use recognized industry experts on that. And then our staff, our radiologic protection managers, especially the one I have at Pilgrim, has done these type of things around the country. Rocky Flats in Colorado was a big project that we worked on. So we have some internal expertise, but we also do bring in outside expertise if necessary.
One more question. Have you guys evaluated any shoreline restoration? We as Palisades spent, I think, $7 million last year putting in rebutments, and with the erosion going on, and I don't know if Energy or you guys have evaluated that, and if you're going to do any shoreline restoration.
Nothing to my knowledge, but I know my first question from Mr. Culp when we're done with this meeting, so we can talk. And the good news is I'm bringing him over. He'll be joining Holtec when we transition. So I know we'll be handling that question as well.
George Stever, Vice President, Utility Workers Union of America, Local 150. First, I want to commend HDI. I've had a lot of contact with my brothers at 1-2 in New York and 369 in Boston, and no complaints so far, so you guys are doing something right. But my question was, I just heard yesterday that there wasn't going to be any dry fuel storage gas movement until 2025 because of the licensing of a new gas. Can you speak to that at all?
In terms of the moving of fuel, what we need to do first, we will not be moving fuel till 2025. The main focus that we need to do is taking the existing spent fuel storage installation that's further inland and expanding that pad space so that we can make sure that we have enough space to totally unload the spent fuel pool. So,
because that seems, I think your slide says spent fuel transfer the dry gas for 2022 till 2025.
No, I'm sorry, that reflects the spent fuel storage installation engineering work and all that as well.
Hey, Greg Goffin, State of Michigan, Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. I did notice that you were pursuing consolidated air storage. So do you have any current plans as to that right now, or are you deferring to Department of Energy at the moment?
So unfortunately, the federal government has not moved. So one of the things, seeing the opportunity during the Obama administration, if there was a blue ribbon panel recommendation for consolidated private storage. So we are continuing that process, hopefully get a license later this year. And the idea is to build that facility within 3 to 4 years to do that. We would also, since we own nuclear plants that are decommissioning, we would move the spent fuel from those facilities first to that location. We still need to work out is, what role the Department of Energy would play in that. Do they want to play a part in that, or do they want to keep that separate, continue down Yucca or the recycling option? So.
Okay, so you may move. What I'm getting at is, are you currently planning on moving spent fuel out of Michigan at this time?
Not at this time, no. Hopefully sometime in the future we'll be able to do that.
Okay, do you have any plans on moving the fuel from Big Rock Point to Palisades?
Under Michigan law, that fuel at Big Rock Point needs to stay at Big Rock. It cannot be moved to the Palisades site. And vice versa.
Just a moment, Mr. Arlene or Washington had his hand raised first, and we'll circle back.
In your slide, you said Orchestra Creek was done 4 months ahead of schedule. What craft was included in that project, performing that work?
Off the top of my head, it was mostly Holtec employees. I don't know what craft labor was involved in that.
I can tell you what group it was: the laborers, operators, and electricians. And now it seems to me that you guys are excluding the very craft that got this job done 4 months ahead of schedule.
Yeah, so
So
to your point, CDI had a national labor agreement with 3 unions: laborers, operating engineers, and IBEW. As they are no longer the general contractor, HDI did go out and solicit 5 unions to join a new national labor agreement. Unfortunately, one of those unions did not sign. The laborers did not sign onto that contract. The other 4 did. And that's what we have to do going forward. We're using the 4 labor unions that signed the contract moving forward.
how would that help the decommissioning trust fund if you're gonna add added cost? Those 2 crafts are more expensive than laborers are, and we're the trained guys to do decommissioning work.
As Pat explained, they signed the national labor agreement, and as I talked to you privately, unfortunately, there is a legal dispute between the laborers and Holtec, and we can't really comment any further really on that right now.
I'm just curious on how would this commission or this board, this body here, could be confident that you would hold up to your other commitments that you might make to this project?
In regards
as
to
it relates to environmental, safety, things of that nature.
It is all heavily regulated by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, including the Decommissioning Trust Fund. Each year, we are required to provide an update to the NRC on the status of the fund. That information will be publicly available to the group. In regards to environmental cleanups, will be held to the federal regulations as well as any state regulations to make sure that the site's properly cleaned up.
Yeah, and regarding any workers on site, they have to be trained and qualified, regardless of what craft union they are. We will not use workers that are not qualified to the job that they need to perform.
But we're the only trade that trains specifically for demolition in the state.
Okay. I understand what you're saying, but you know, we will stick with our national labor contract.
Fair enough.
Currently, is there 2 dry gas storage areas on the site? An old one that's maybe closer to the lake and a new one, which is farther north. And I think what I heard you said that the goal is to expand the newer one to then will all the gas be moved to that one location away from the.
That would be the intention.
Yeah.
You would want to have one secure protected area. Yes.
Agreed. Thanks.
Hi there, Kate Hosier from the city of South Haven. I was curious about the brief mention of the small modular reactor. I understand this is just the designing process and you're looking for more information, but is there anything else you can share on that?
In terms of the small modular reactor, there's we have no plans to do with Palisades unless you want one. But the idea with the nuclear energy, unfortunately, you have great energy demand, especially for carbon-free energy. You have a lot of the coal plants shutting down. Natural gas is great for baseload energy, but it still has carbon emissions, and solar and wind are great. But unfortunately, they don't operate 24/7. So nuclear has a key role. It's the biggest provider of carbon-free electricity. So we see that opportunity. In addition to ourselves, there's other companies out there also looking at small modular reactors. You hear talk of molten salt reactors using recycled fuel. Those are all great in theory on paper. Unfortunately, the NRC licensing standards, there are no NRC license standards for that type of technology. Our SMR, as well as 1 or 2 other companies, are designed on the existing reactor technology. Ours is pressurized water reactor technology using the existing NRC licensing basis. So We're hopeful. We've received support from the Federal Department of Energy in the past 3 years to continue the design. We were also approached by the Department of Energy about 6 months ago. We're submitting a loan application. They came to us to hopefully get additional funding for the small modular reactor. So the licensing process will be lengthy. We were just at the infancy stage of that. We also have a lot of international companies that are involved in the nuclear industry as well. Everyone's familiar with Hyundai cars, but they also have, they're very active, another branch of the company over in South Korea doing full-scale reactors. So working with them and also some manufacturers in the United States. Kiewit is a major manufacturer, partnering with companies that have levels of expertise to further the development of the design and hopefully execution.
Hi, Kurt Doro, Commissioner of Van Buren County. Could you go back to your decommissioning approach, 10-year pause, and kind of what is a 10-year pause?
Okay, I'll speak to that. So the NRC requires you to have sufficient funding to proceed in decommissioning. And unfortunately, with the balance that Palisades has, there's a shortfall. So our intention would be to do the first initial part to remove all spent fuel, spending some money there, obviously, but then pausing for 10 years to allow the trust fund to grow to a sufficient amount of money that then you can complete the balance of decommissioning.
So will there be workers there?
There'll always be security as long as there's fuel.
Security, right.
And there will be staff. It probably won't be at the same levels that it's at right now, quite frankly, but the intention would be to, yes, keep staff on site. There's regulatory requirements and management at the site along with the security. The security is the key piece.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ken Harrington, Corey Township. I know you said earlier that no spent fuel will be handed down to Palisades, but how can we as a community ensure that our community doesn't turn into a graveyard from other decommissioned sites? How can we ensure that?
From other sites, you're saying, like similar, like Big Rock, you're saying?
Yes.
It's not allowed by Michigan law, which is, I think, the first key piece. And honestly, because of the federal government's failure to find a suitable place for spent fuel, every plant that's ever had fuel still has it. So unfortunately, until either an interim storage like Joe was talking about that we develop comes online, or the federal government finds that final repository, I think the fuel will be here until that. It's not going to be something that you're moving around more than once. It's a challenge to move it to begin with. So it's not something that I think is easily transferable, between sites. So and again, state law doesn't allow you, so it's not going to happen.
One other thing, if I could add on top of that, is it's a challenge at all the decommissioning sites. You're going to clean up everything. The one thing that's going to be remaining is the spent fuel. So it's working together. I think when we get further along to that point is hopefully the federal government, we have consolidated storage or there's another solution available, is, working together, not just, with you, but all the other local communities, the sites that Holtec owns and other companies own, to put pressure to have a solution so they can fully redevelop that site. Because there is that stigma that spent fuel still being there. You can do some development, but some people won't want to be a part of that. So I think working together across the country for all the decommissioning sites, I think that would bring value to getting that done.
Pat, as part of your response to the 10-year pause, you talked about the trust fund and you mentioned the word shortfall. Can you provide some clarification on that, please?
Sure. I guess, yeah. So I think when we had the opening slide, I'm going to try to pull it back up, but we project a total cost of $644 million to complete decommissioning, $443 million, that would be the license termination, $166 million spent fuel, and $34.5 million for site restoration. Unfortunately, the balance in the trust fund is $576 million. So you don't have enough right now to complete start to finish decommissioning. You have enough to do the fuel and then let that grow from there. And I'll give an example. So we're required to update it annually. So we, as Joe had mentioned, are only allowed to assume a 2% growth by the NRC for these trust funds. But many of these funds do much better than that. So we will obviously monitor that along the way, but I'll say in Pilgrim's example, when we took that plant over, we projected $1.1 billion to complete the decommissioning, and $1.08 billion, so very, very close. Allowed us to move fuel, allowed us to do early demo, We spent approximately in 3 years, $500 million there, and the trust fund itself at $800 million as of the end of the year. So when you do the math, it's a little bit more than 2% growth on that. We've been able to manage the trust fund well in a way that's allowed us to do a lot of work up front. So, similarly, we'll be working to manage the trust fund in a way that could potentially shorten that 10-year pause. But being conservative and following what you're allowed to do with the NRC, that's really what has to be in that projection.
Colbert resident, Colbert Township has experienced a tax reform reduction over the last few years. Can you tell me how much taxes hotels will pay once ownership is taken?
I defer to Nick because I'm not sure what Entergy's paying right now. And then I know it's not a pilot agreement. It's actually it's a straight assessment.
Township assessment.
So it would be by the assessor, and the assessor would come in and evaluate the plant. I will say nationwide, when these plants shut down, obviously you're not generating power anymore. The assessment on the equipment and the value of the property usually goes down, as does the taxes at that point. It's just based on the fact that you're not an operating plant anymore.
Right, but once you take ownership, shouldn't the taxes go back up once you decommission?
No, because you'd be removing equipment, you'd be removing things that generated power before that had value. You will go down as you decommission, but once you clean up the site and redevelop, then you would have the ability to increase those taxes. That's really kind of the logic behind our getting the project done sooner, to allow for potential reuse and growth of the tax base.
And in the future, if you use those SMRs to create energy, then the taxes will go up.
You would be taxing what the value of an SMR producing power is. So yes, I would say that would be something that would be of much more value than decommissioning plant.
Okay, one more question. Entergy has been a good neighbor.
Absolutely.
To everybody Entergy's been a good neighbor to us for some time. And by sponsoring, different sponsorships and donations. Can you tell me what kind of neighbor Holtec?
We still do that at the other plants. We're still a good neighbor. I will say that we can't do it at the number that Entergy has always done that, but we do commit a good amount of money to the communities every year to continue a lot of those traditions. We work with Entergy staff now to identify what they've given in the past, the levels, and then what they see as good projects to continue to provide donations to and work with them to ensure that those are funded going forward.
Thank you, Gail Patterson, Gladdy, Van Buren County Commissioner for District 1. It's my understanding that no dry cask storage spent fuel has been moved at all in the country.
So from an operating plant, you're saying? Since they outlawed reprocessing in the 70s, that'd be correct.
Oh, and so with the consolidated storage, that's a good idea, but my understanding is not that, like with Yucca Mountain, it wasn't as much a problem of storing, having a site to store these dry cask storage tanks, but the movement of the dry cask storage tanks across highways, by water, flying. So have you come up with a solution of how to transport with the national guidelines?
So DOE would be responsible for that, but I will say this. There are specially designed trains that would be able to take the inner canister of a dry fuel storage container, place that on rail and bring that to a facility. The other thing is that when I was responding initially, I said commercial reactors. The Navy does this almost every day. The Navy does move fuel around the country. You just really don't know about it. So it does occur. It's just not something that's promoted heavily.
Yeah, it would most likely be trucked to a rail location, and then the rails go on these special rails, and the trucks would be specialized too. And everything's security monitored, and the DOE determines the route and things like that, and it's remote monitored. It's pretty fascinating. We can get some additional information for you on that.
Okay, and so it could somehow secretly be sent out and to your consolidated storage. I mean,
I don't know what the commercial
I don't think we would be secretly doing that. That's not the right thing to do, so.
Okay, but I think a gentleman was going to tell me about the transportation, but if they're not transported, how long do you have to have security and how, at the plant, and how far in the future do you project that you will have to have security?
So there's,
Considering the
there will be
present
security, yeah, there will be security as long as there's fuel. What traditionally or typically happens at these plants, because DOE has defaulted on having a final repository for storage, you unfortunately have to sue the federal government initially to recoup your costs, and that includes security and the maintenance of the dry cast. So what ends up happening is eventually you get into basically a settlement with the Department of Energy that will continue to fund security and the staff on the site related to fuel. There's a number of plants in the Northeast that I know, it used to be Maine Yankee, Connecticut Yankee, Yankee Row. They're all in that situation. I was talking to someone there recently who had worked at my plant and went up to what's now just a pad in the middle of nowhere in Western Mass. And he did get a kick out of it. He said a lot of these security guards that have come to the site only know the site as a pad. They never knew it as an operational facility. So it's kind of interesting to see the life cycle of the plants like that, where you do have some security that were never there when it was an operating plant that just been there protected fuel.
Thank you.
We actually got one of my answers in that. So Greg got that. I'm with Eagle. I can get with you later if you like. I'll give you my card. I work with one of the things I do is sit on these Midwestern Radioactive Materials Transportation Committee, which is a regional committee. And we work directly with DOE. I'm going to be getting together with DOE and those guys in the near future. I'm actually touring Holtec in June. So if you have questions, just let me know.
I could probably ask this question to Greg as well, but John Engelhoff, Southwest Michigan Planning Commission. You talked about the transportation of waste that is Class C or above or below, I'm not sure. But can you help a person who doesn't speak that language understand what is below that level and what fits into that class, and how will you be moving it and where does it go?
Sure. Yeah, it gets a little technical when it comes to different classes, but the easiest way to look at it is anything greater than Class C you cannot ship right now as the law stands. That will stay on the spent fuel storage pad and specially designed containers with the spent fuel. Everything below that is shippable. It just depends on when. So it comes down to what's the radioactivity level, what's the weight of it. But for the most part, and I'll say this at our other facilities, what's called A-level waste is pretty much immediately shippable. We've been doing a lot of that out of Oyster Creek, Pilgrim, and Indian Point. We have a fleet-wide waste contract with WCS in West Texas. So most of that, let's say all of that, is going to West Texas to their facility. In the beginning, it was a lot of truck all the way down, which is obviously not, I think, as efficient as you could have it. Now a lot of our transportation is truck to rail, and it goes down by rail down to West Texas, which they have a rail facility on their site.
So that's A, and there's
A and B and C. And B and C right now, we have specially designed BC waste boxes that we have on site. Basically, I wish I had a picture from Pilgrim. They're giant Legos. They're concrete Legos. They're called Legio blocks. And you design that to basically fit the containers and shield them on site until they're shippable, which is usually a few years on the line as they decay. But for the most part in there, it's irradiated metals from inside the reactor. Most of the low level A waste is some metals, and there's some say concrete and things along those lines that are a little low level waste that go. But a lot of it comes out clean. A lot of these plants and a lot of these buildings, there is a lot of clean waste that's recyclable. The building I showed on the building slides that came down as a sheet metal building, had concrete in it. All that came out clean, but they were able to separate the waste streams and recycle a lot of it. So metal, concrete, rebar, insulation. So we've been very proactive in ensuring that we're not just dumping trash. It's spread out and reused as much as it can for recycling.
Is radioactive wastewater considered class C, above class C, or below class C?
Radioactive wastewater, so it's process treated water, is none of those. It's considered liquid effluent under the NRC and EPA regulations. The NRC regulates liquid effluent and what levels could possibly be processed and discharged or evaporated or trucked. Yeah, I think that I'm trying to think. There's another part of your question that I'm blanking on. Oh, well, so it's not considered a level of waste. It's considered a environmental effluent. We're required annually to provide reports to the NRC. Those are publicly available on the NRC's website for every plant that operates. Every plant that's operated has done liquid discharges in their plant history. It's something that's regularly done. They're well below federal limits. And then what you also have is you have environmental impact reports. At Pilgrim, it's evaluating the bay with lobsters, oysters, fish. So you go and actually take samples and identify if there's any impact on the bay. And the reports that we have, there hasn't been on that. So I know it's a question.
And if I may add to that, we do have directions on the PCAX website under the resources tab about how you can sign up to be on the listserv for Holtec. So when those reports do come out and are published, they can be delivered to your inbox. So that's a resource that's available.
So is it possible that wastewater could be released into Lake Michigan?
Yeah, it could be. It's an allowable option as long as we meet state and federal requirements. And it's something that's been occurring for the entire life of the plant.
Well, you currently, or Energy has MPDES permits that they've been doing this for 50+ years of on-site treatment and discharge into Lake Michigan. We're the benefit of the cooling tower because we have 75-degree water in June in Lake Michigan, which is sort of unheard of, which we will no longer have as Palisades. But under those permits, because those aren't regulated by the NRC, those are state of Michigan permits.
Correct, and I have the same in Massachusetts. So basically what the NIPD's permit will say is there's a list of pollutants that you're not allowed to discharge. And this is where it gets kind of complicated and there's a lot of questions. Radioactivity is not considered a pollutant under a NIPD's permit. It's kind of where the EPA and the NRC separate. So if the waters meet the pollutant limits to release, and then below the radioactivity to release, you could release them. It's an option. It's one of 3 options that are available to the site.
Oh, one other question for demolition. I saw in one of your slides that looked like a standard, excavator with a ram on it for breaking concrete. Is there any implosion done during demolition?
I don't think we have any of that plan. What we've actually used with a lot of success is diamond wire cutting. So it's you take you drill some holes, and there was pictures of it in my Indian Point slides, where you would drill through into containment through the metal, and you put a wire that's impregnated with diamonds, cut out blocks clean. It's actually a much easier way to clean it up, to be honest with you, because you're not just dealing with a lot of rubble. You're taking it out in pieces, segmenting, and then you can reduce those. So we've had a lot of success doing that. At Indian Point, we did it at Pilgrim for what are called the reactor shield blocks. What was over the actual reactor was 4-foot thick concrete blocks. So we've done a lot of that. Implosion, it's much more surgical than that. The implosion, and I think people start thinking about getting rid of buildings. You're talking about explosives and things like that. It's not. It's much more surgical and planned. You don't want to create that dust. You don't want to create those issues. And there's requirements that we have to follow when it comes to dust and suppression along those lines. So we found that the diamond wire technology that we use has been really good.
Do we have any other questions at this time from the PCAP? Not seeing anybody jump up. I will remind you, if you have any questions that come up as a member of the PCAP or the public, we're about to get to you folks. If you have any questions that didn't get answered, please send them to the Palisades@marketvanburen.org email. we'll pass them on to Holtec and get them passed on. Having said that, we will begin to open up the floor for public comment. So we'll ask folks to begin to line up here. We'll follow the same protocol as before. We'll ask you to keep it topical and relevant to Holtec. We will alternate between folks who are online and folks who are in person. We have a very strong line already started, so I will begin by handing this off to you.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Craig Schultz. I live 50 miles from Palisades. I'm a member of Michigan Safe Energy Future. I have 4 comments and questions to go with each comment. My first comment, the risk of a Chernobyl scale nuclear accident in Palisades will continue until several years after the plant stops producing electricity. NRC report New Reg 1738 entitled Technical Study of Spent Fuel Pool Accident Risk at Decommissioning Nuclear Power Plants identifies there is a risk of having a fire in the spent fuel pool until all of the fuel bundles are safely transferred from the spent fuel pool to dry cask storage. It generally takes several years for spent fuel to cool down in the spent fuel pool before it is safe enough to transfer to dry cask. So there is a risk that this plant could cause a major nuclear accident while Holtec owns it. My question is, what assurance do we have that Holtec can or will maintain the staffing that it needs so that it can safely maintain and transfer the spent fuel to dry cask? My second comment, on the subject of the fuel pool water and other water that may be contaminated with radioactive particles, since Lake Michigan is the source of drinking water for millions of people, radioactive water from the plant should not be disposed into Lake Michigan. My question is, how does Holtec propose to dispose the water from Palisades during the decommissioning process? My third comment, metal in the nuclear reactor is weakened over time by neutron irradiation. The weakened metal in the reactor pressure vessel is a risk factor that could lead to meltdowns. The test coupons that are presently in the pressure vessel and the metal of the pressure vessel itself can provide critical data to help improve nuclear safety to other plants around the world. Therefore, these materials should be transferred for analysis during decommissioning. My question is, when and by what methods will Holtec provide the test coupons and sections of the reactor pressure vessel, and to whom will these materials be given? My fourth and final comment, given Holtec's short and interesting history of decommissioning nuclear power plants, it is important that oversight is present to ensure Holtec is held accountable to complete the work described in the PSDR safely, successfully, and within budget. My questions are, who is providing this oversight? And will the public have a way to monitor this oversight? How and on what dates will the public have this opportunity for oversight? I'm giving a copy of my comments and questions to the panel and would like to have answers put on the public record. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I wrote them down, so let me try to answer them in order. The staffing, there's a required level through what's called Zerk fire, which is what you spoke to about the potential for Zerk fire. We've done that at all of our other plants. The staffing remains at the level that we're talking about taking over the plant at, the 260 through Zerk fire. Water, we will look at all available options for water disposition. At Pilgrim, we did about 680,000 gallons of evaporation prior to where we are now with that project. So we are looking at all options and understand, you know, as someone who lives in a community going through decommissioning, who swims and fishes off the plant, I understand your concerns. So that's something we're working very hard to understand. It's bigger than a Holtec issue. It's an industry issue. This is something that the entire industry is looking at. So we will continue to look at all available options. The test coupon question is good. We'll have to get back to that one because that's not one I'm familiar with. But we're not looking at doing reactor segmentation here until after the 10-year pause. So it's a number of years before we'd be getting into that type of work. And oversight, you know, we do have internal QA, but really the oversight is with the NRC. There is NRC public meetings. The NRC does provide the reports from inspections, and I will say, while once the plant shuts down, they no longer usually have a resident inspector on site. They are frequently at these sites performing a multitude of inspections that are all publicly available. And then I would say you know, if you want the public information, this panel is going to be a good forum for that type of information.
Julia, if you would unmute the first person online, who will you be unmuting?
Kevin Camps.
Mr. Camps, you're about to be unmuted.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So my comments on economics analysis, I put into the chat or the Q&A box and also to your email address. But these are my 3 minutes on Holtec. Holtec CEO Krishna Singh has floated the trial balloon of building one or more so-called small modular nuclear reactors at Palisades, according to an article by Exchange Monitor, dated April 8th. We had long feared this since Holtec had already pulled this bait and switch at Oyster Creek, New Jersey. Here is the relevant passage from the article, and I quote, "Meanwhile, Holtec would also consider similar SMR projects at some of its other decommissioning sites, such as the Palisades plant in Michigan," Singh said Tuesday. However, he said the company would not propose advanced reactors for some decommissioning sites, particularly New York's Indian Point and Massachusetts Pilgrim plant, because of local resistance. "They would burn us in effigy if we even said that, never mind build one," Singh said, end of quote. So I suppose if Palisades is fair game, so too then is Big Rock Point, also on the Lake Michigan shore near Charlevoix in northern Michigan. Holtec has also applied to take it over from Entergy. My response? Over my dead body. If Krishna Singh thinks the Lake Michigan shore in West Michigan is easy prey for targeting his SMRs at, he has revealed his profound ignorance of the proud and effective history of the anti-nuclear movement in Michigan, dating back 65 years, when Leo Goodman of the United Auto Workers presciently sued the Atomic Energy Commission to prevent the construction of the now infamous "we almost lost Detroit" Fermi 1 reactor in Monroe County. This history includes Don't Waste Michigan's blocking of an 8-state so-called low-level radioactive waste dump targeted at us, stopping the Midland nuclear power plant and other proposed reactors like Fermi 3 dead in their tracks. A groundswell of resistance, including from Eternal General Frank Kelly, against Palisades' dangerous lakeside dry cast storage in the first place. The shutdown for good of Big Rock Point in 1997 and the fending off of a state park there due to the lingering hazardous radioactive contamination of soil, groundwater, and Lake Michigan sediments. It may have taken us more than 50 years, but the very high-risk Palisades atomic reactor itself is now shutting down for good by May 31st. Some local resistors have fought Palisades from pre-construction right up to the present. This includes friends of mine in Kalamazoo who gathered petition signatures against Palisades before it was built. This also includes Maynard Kaufman of Bangor, founder of the Michigan Organic Food and Farm Alliance, who passed on last summer. In fact, he and his recently departed wife, Barb Geisler, as members and supporters, provided us at Beyond Nuclear with the legal standing in our intervention against Holtec's takeover of Palisades and Big Rock Point in February 2021, regarding which 14 months later, we are still waiting on NRC.
We have reached our time limit. I appreciate your thoughts and comments. We are very at the end.
Krishna Singh suggested a burning.
Thank you. Please provide any additional comments you have not been able to receive also in the chat. Julia is receiving those. They will be distributed to the PCAP, Holtec, and made available to members of the public. May we have our next member here?
I'm Cal DeMage. I live between Bangor and Lakota, and I'm wondering if our Holtec folks can give me some kind of reassurance as to how this works. You've mentioned that federal law says you can't do this, and state of Michigan law says that you can't do that. And I have a 14-page list of bribery convictions, tax fraud issues, tax credits that were denied because Holtec said they would provide jobs and they didn't. I've got disbarment from working in Alabama. I've got bribery in Libya and in Mexico and in Ukraine. And I just wonder, who are we dealing with here? And I look at this stuff, and if we've got any newspaper people here, I'll give you a copy of my 14 pages. but I wonder, who you guys are and how you can assure me that you're even remotely competent for this job, because I have grave concerns. This is not even 20 miles from my house, and I wonder what you guys are doing.
In regards to some of the comments that were made, the company was disbarred from the Tennessee Valley Authority several years ago. And we paid a fine, and that disbarment lasted about just over a week. Tennessee Valley Authority remains a valued customer to this day with a multi-million-dollar contract. In regards to the comment regarding bribes with Libya, that was with S&C Lavalin, which was the joint venture with CDI. And again, we've ended that joint venture with S&C Lavalin on that. In regards to the tax credits with the state of New Jersey, as someone who lives and works in New Jersey as well, the tax credits, we have met the requirements for jobs. There was arguments with the state of New Jersey over the tax credit application. We did go to court with the state of New Jersey, and the judge did rule in our favor that the state was required to pay the tax credits. The state of New Jersey has in turn has filed an appeal on that issue. So that issue has been currently going through that process.
And just to speak to who we are, as I said before, I'm a former Entergy employee. I live 8 miles from the plant. I live there with my wife and 2 kids. Part of the reason I stayed on and kept this job was to ensure that it was done right and to be a valuable asset to the community. So, the people that are going to be doing this work are the people that are there right now. The management may change, similar to, Entergy's management's in New Orleans right now. Holtex is in New Jersey, but the people on site doing the work, they're the local people.
Thank you for that. Julia, would you please open up unmute our next person online? Sure. And who are you unmuting?
Michael Lee.
Michael Lee, you are.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. I'm just very curious as to the number of employees that are with the CDI that was been transferred from SNC Lavalin to Holtec. I don't know if that's something that could be answered now, and if so, what category of employee are they, and are they also employed or affiliated with any of the other many limited liability corporations of Holtec?
So the CDI employees directly transferred over to HDI. At Pilgrim, that was 150 at the time. Indian Point, I think it's around 300. Oyster Creek is probably 70. And they were direct. So all of those were either former for the most part, Exelon or Entergy employees that transitioned over. So you had all levels. So you had site management, radiation protection, operations, security, pretty much every silo that we have working maintenance in the plant. So it's all the same local people that transitioned over. It's just the hard hat changed.
So these were not people that were employed by SNC Lavalin previously. These were all Exelon or Entergy workers.
Correct. There were very few, from personal experience, there were very few people that had come from SNC and joined CDI. I would say prior to, as part of the planning phase, that were on site ahead of transition of those sites. I think the program side, I can think of one person that might be left that had been, actually they were an Atkins employee, which was a company that SNC had acquired shortly before they transitioned to CDI. So they're really more of an Atkins employee, but it was some of the planning and development part was really where the SNC CDI people had been involved.
Thank you for that. We're going to move to our next person here in the room.
Good evening, I'm Dylan Burnett, live in Hager Shore. I just got a couple questions for Holtec. So I used to be a badged employee out there, so I probably know the answer to these, but I'm gonna ask them anyway. So we already know about the radiological concerns with decommissioning this, but my question to you is, do you foresee any asbestos abatement as you move forward in this? That's one question.
I would say based on the vintage of the plant and the fact that we've run into asbestos at every other plant, yes.
So my next question to you is, do you know the only craft that is certified in the state of Michigan to do asbestos abatement?
Not offhand.
Okay, well, that's the laborers. So the third question is, can you ensure to me and everybody else how you're gonna perform this work safely, timely, safely, and everything else, not having the appropriate craft that is certified in that endeavor?
So as we have national labor agreements, some of those unions are formulating asbestos workers, other things that will be qualified to do that work. I don't know offhand the Michigan rules, whether in other states, it's the carpenters that are doing some of that, so. I'm just letting you know, we'll work with our national labor agreements, we're not gonna do work with unqualified people. What? Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, we've got the time constraint, it's 8 o'clock, so what we would like to do is let the people in line ask their questions, and we will turn off the microphones from outside the room so that the people phoning in will not be able to ask any more questions, but what they can do is send their question in and we will answer the question via email. So if we can continue with the people in line, and then we will adjourn right after that.
Hello, my name is Potter with Michigan Safe Energy Future, Kalamazoo. I love Lake Michigan with all my heart, but I'm extremely concerned about decommissioning with all the quick moving parts and how it will affect everything, including our health. We know it is a lot about the money. Regarding Holtec's safety program, there was a near drop of a fully loaded Holtec's UMAX dry cast due to the bad design of the storage system at the San Onofre plant, as well as gouging of the exteriors of the cast containers, which will accelerate corrosion and ultimate container failure. Regarding the Oyster Creek update, there was a dousing and dosing of a worker due to Holtec's rush during irradiated nuclear fuel transfer from indoor wet storage pool to dry cast. It is one thing to accelerate a timeline, but this is dangerous material. There is also no mention of a contingency plan in the event of a cast problem, which was to rush a spare transport cast from the New Jersey headquarters to Oyster Creek. Question, Palisades is far from headquarters, so what is the contingency plan for damaged casks? Holtec casts are thin-walled and vulnerable to short-term cracking. They cannot be inspected inside or out, cannot be repaired, cannot be monitored or maintained to prevent leaks, vulnerable to explosions, and then rust. Each canister has as much highly radioactive cesium as was released from Chernobyl at the 1986 explosion. It is good to move the 13 casks from above the beach, where they have been for about 29 years, to inland, but closer to Van Buren State Park and Palisades Park community is concerning. And there may be unknown gamma ray and neutron dose emissions from these degraded casks, especially since one is already known has had weld issues since early on. So what kind of testing has been done to find out how these old casks are degraded, and why was the Palisades trading building area so close to the parks chosen as the site? What will the air, land, and water protocol for radiation monitoring be? And we do encourage independent monitoring, folks. And also, we oppose small modular reactors on the site. It would also be good to know what exactly will the dormancy period look like on the ground. So thank you, and let's get this done right. Thank you.
If I can just respond to the one comment regarding the dry cast. The dry casks are designed to last for over 100 years. There's an NRC licensing standard. It's an initial license of 20 years. Beyond that, you need to get additional license from the NRC, and there's an extensive aging management program. No cask, not just Holtec or other in the United States, has developed a leak throughout its operating history. So they are safe.
Hi, my name is Alex Zerk, proud member of Labor's Local 355. I'd like to give a shout out to my man, business manager, Arlander, Washington. Just so people that don't know, I grew up in South Haven. I knew a lot of people that worked at Palisades, fished with them, drank with them, everything else. My father worked there, my brothers worked there. I personally worked there for 10 years. I actually poured the cast that are sitting on the slab right now, poured the slab as well. I guess my point is, what I want to say, you know, obviously I'm concerned on this demolition project, but I'm also concerned that the laborers at this point are not involved. And I understand that's not your guys' concern. There's some issues going on, I understand that. But I guess I would ask you guys to look at the project at Big Rock. Big Rock was done with all the laborers, and I'm sure nobody in this room has heard no problem there because there wasn't any. Everything went fine. There was no problems. It was a great project, great for our members, great for the people that live here. As well as we have a lot of members that live here. It's important to their project, and they consider it basically a slap in the face if they're not involved. And they're very upset. Now, I understand that. But I got another couple of questions. So you got trust fund money. Who's investing that money? You guys invest that money?
We do have an investment piece, but the NRC regulates that, and there's a third-party financial, which I believe is, you know.
Is it private equity?
No, it's, I'm trying to remember the name of, I wanted to say it was Mellon Bank, but I don't think it's on top.
All right, here's my follow-up question. You're forecasting 2% return, right?
We're only allowed to forecast no more than.
I understand that.
Okay.
Current inflation is over 2%. Wages are over 4.5% currently. 10 years out, could be worse. What happens if you run out of money?
You would continue to pause. The reality is, at least in recent times with our other plants, you've gotten a much better return than 2%.
So let's hope that happens. I guess the important piece, I own property here in Salt Lake. Last thing I want to see is the community get fucked here. I mean, excuse me, screwed.
As someone who lives in a community, I completely understand your concerns.
Hi, Debbie Cook, Covert Township Board and Market in Buren. I'm having a hard time understanding how we can repurpose a site that has spent fuel on it. Do you have any examples of how they have been repurposed in the past?
Sure. So you do clean up to it, depending on the site, an NRC standard or a state standard. The NRC standard is a resident farmer model of 25 milligram a year. So you, outside of where the fuel is in the protected area, once it reaches what's called unrestricted release criteria by the NRC, you can use it for any number of things. But there is a lot of hesitancy, I think, with spent fuel on sites to redevelop a lot of these sites. There's been a number that have been turned into parks. I think there's been some that have done some commercial, or at least industrial. But yeah, for the most part, it's been industrial or it's been green space.
Are there any restrictions on the use?
Depending on the site. So I'll say it is, if there was ever contamination found past where they couldn't release this a part of the site, and a lot of the times it happens when you try to get to a state standard as opposed to a federal standard, they could partially restrict the site, yes.
Okay, so that sort of answers my other question, which is can parts of the site be released for development before others?
Yeah, the intention would be, as part of that site characterization, you look through and see what I'll say is clean, or what needs remediation. A couple of our other sites have approached us, New York, Indian Point. There's about 60 acres out of the 240 that, from what the town has said, is virgin land. It's never been impacted by site use. That's something we're looking at to see if, for economic benefit for them, if we could kind of carve that parcel off and release it from the NRC license sooner. To do that. So that's always an option. Similarly, if we're looking at that, Oyster not so much because Oyster does have the desire to have the small modular reactor.
So does that require some communication with the township community members?
It would be
to
with
see if
everybody,
there's-
yeah. And that's what we usually do is when I said before, we're willing to work with the local community and what future reuse is, that's a big part of that. The village in New York approached us about potentially doing the 60 acres, getting that released. The town in New York, there's a lot of government there. The town has an interest in another parcel that's not on the NRC license. That might be easier to release for them. So we're always willing to work if it makes sense and it works with our timeline.
My name's Dale Pop. I live just by crow flies 5 miles from there. Work there. Iron worker by trade. Been there on and off up until about 2010. Okay. The thing that I'm really concerned with is the water. It's the high water table in that area. You're underneath the turbine deck on ground level. You have a pit area that's on the north end. Some pumps quit and that was flooded years ago. You've got so much of your facility is below groundwater and you're tearing this place down. I'm worried about water table contamination and, how you guys are gonna address that through the whole process. I know it doesn't start, but yeah.
No, actually, to your point, it does. With the site characterization, that's what we look at, is those known issues over the years, what's there, what and how we would remediate, and prepare once you do the work to take care of issues like that. So it is really more during that, I'll say the informational stage where you're doing the testing on water, soil, and known issues, known spills, known flooding, things along those lines.
Well, that's the thing, is that if we have contaminated water, Lake Michigan is less than a stone's throw away. And, it would be an environmental disaster that you guys would have to be responsible for.
And that's the risk the company takes in taking on these decommissioning plants, is we're the ones willing to come in and clean it up, and we believe we can do that.
Okay, I like the idea of moving the cask away from the shoreline, get it back in there. I think that's a real good part of it to your plan. Fingers crossed, guys. I'd like to see it happen. And thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Betty Pierman, and I have been an activist with the Michigan Safe Energy Future and Palisades Shutdown Campaign. I am very concerned about the Great Lakes. It's the largest freshwater inland lake system in the world, and I will fight to my death to protect it. And when I see that you're talking about doing barge shipments of contaminated stuff from that plant on Lake Michigan with waves that can be 20 feet high or more, I am livid over that. And I know what you said.
No, I was just saying, before we said there wouldn't be any barging. The only thing that we consider barging is DOE. It's not anything we'd be doing for moving.
All right, I spent the afternoon with post-shutdown decommissioning activities report from Holtec that's dated December 23rd, 2020. Okay? This is a quote. HDI may elect to ship large plant components by barge. Use of barge transportation to remove waste and provide waste disposal transportation could provide an opportunity for improving project schedule and costs. So a cost-saving measure, you're going to risk our Great Lakes for a cost-saving measure? This is a quote from your document. And then it goes on to say, the barge slip or landing, and if needed, dredging to allow navigation of vessels to the slip for loading and transport of selected wastes may be constructed adjacent to the facility. So we've got a shoreline that's been disappearing because of erosion. And now you're talking about the possibility of going in and damaging that shoreline even more with something like this. It's crazy.
In the PSDAR, it also mentions that if we were to pursue doing a barge, because there is pretty much a non-existent barge slip there, that it would have to be done in cooperation with permits from the Army Corps of Engineers as well as the state of Michigan. So to do that, the PSDAR also, it does specifically mention regarding the transportation of the spent nuclear fuel that would be a determination by the Department of Energy, not by Holtec. But we do have the potential in the history of the plant when they've been bringing in large components for outages and for other work that has been shipped by a truck, and that will, I'm not going to say it's definitely going to be that, but that will most likely be the preferred method of transportation.
I'm just saying that you didn't tell the truth when you started out here.
And that was a doctor. I will say too that, we have a favorable waste contract We have a favorable waste contract that we've worked with our people. We looked at barge berths in Massachusetts. It didn't make financial sense to do a barge berth. We do truck to rail. Truck to rail seems to be the easiest method for a lot of this to ensure that it gets to landfill.
Massachusetts is a whole other thing, because you want to dump radiated waste into their.
No, it's water that is treated and processed is below legal limits that we have to follow. And I live in that community and I swim in that community. No, it doesn't, because I have the environmental reports that show exactly when we take the water, put it in the discharge canal, we sample lobsters, oysters. The facts are, it does not impact. No, they're not.
Okay, just, our next meeting will occur sometime late next fall. We will have our fourth meeting after we see the progress that has started on the shutdown. So sometime the latter, or in either November or December will be our next meeting. So at this time, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Support.
It's been moved and supported. All in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Nays? We are adjourned.